stop. Just stop whatever you're doing right now and look at this, because what just happened in the last 3 hours is not a routine forecast update, and it is not the kind of incremental change that meteorologists issue advisories about as a matter of procedural caution. What just happened is that the Storm Prediction Center, the federal agency whose entire existence is dedicated to tracking and communicating severe weather threats across the United States, the agency staffed by the most experienced atmospheric scientists in the country, the agency that is professionally and institutionally trained to be measured and precise and never ever alarmist, just upgraded today's severe weather threat. Upgraded it, meaning the forecast they issued this morning, the one that was already serious enough to warrant widespread concern across a multi-state corridor, was not capturing the full picture of what the atmosphere is now showing them. The models have been updating, the surface observations have been coming in, the wind profiler data and the upper air soundings and the reconnaissance data have all been pointing in the same direction with an accelerating consistency that left the forecasters at the Storm Prediction Center with no honest choice but to raise the risk level and expand the threat area and tell tens of millions of people that what is coming today is worse than what they told you this morning. Worse. Not different. Not shifted. Worse. And if you are anywhere inside this threat corridor right now, and that corridor is larger than it was 6 hours ago, you need to understand exactly what that upgrade means, why it happened, and what you need to do about it before the atmosphere delivers on everything the data is now promising. Let me take you back to this morning first, because the contrast between where this forecast started and where it is right now is what makes the urgency of this moment so impossible to overstate. When the Storm Prediction Center issued their morning outlook, they were working with a setup that was already concerning, a strong upper level disturbance interacting with a deeply unstable warm sector, a dry line developing across the southern plains, a low-level jet beginning to strengthen and pump Gulf moisture northward into the target area. That morning outlook carried a significant risk designation for portions of the threat corridor, and that designation alone was enough to put emergency managers on alert, enough to prompt school districts in the most exposed counties to begin reviewing their severe weather protocols, enough to generate the kind of quiet but intense operational mobilization that happens behind the scenes whenever the SPC puts out an outlook that reads like this one did. That was this morning. That was the forecast before the atmosphere started showing its hand more clearly, before the surface boundaries sharpened, before the wind shear values came in higher than the models had been projecting, before the convective available potential energy readings from the afternoon soundings revealed an instability profile that is sitting at the extreme end of what the historical record shows for significant tornado outbreaks in this region. The morning forecast was serious. What replaced it 3 hours ago is in a different category entirely. The upgrade happened because multiple atmospheric parameters move simultaneously in the wrong direction. And in severe weather forecasting, simultaneous adverse changes across multiple parameters are not additive, they are multiplicative. Each individual parameter that worsens the severe weather environment makes every other parameter more dangerous because the ingredients for violent convection do not operate independently. They interact, they reinforce each other. And when the shear increases at the same time, the instability increases. At the same time, the moisture content increases. At the same time, the lifting mechanism sharpens. You do not get a storm that is merely somewhat worse than yesterday's forecast. You get an atmosphere that is capable of producing the kind of long-track, violent, photogenic on radar and terrifying, on-the-ground supercells that show up in the history books next to dates and names of towns that were never quite the same afterward. That is the atmosphere that is building right now across this corridor. And the Storm Prediction Center's upgrade is their professional, data-driven, carefully considered way of telling you that they see it too. Let me walk through the specific parameters that drove this upgrade, because understanding what changed and why it matters is the foundation of understanding how serious today has become. The first parameter is CAPE, convective available potential energy, which is the atmospheric measurement of how much fuel is available for thunderstorm development. KP is measured in joules per kilogram, and the operational thresholds that forecasters use to categorize severe weather environments run from modest at around 1,000 joules per kilogram through extreme at values above 4,000. The afternoon soundings coming in from across the warm sector ahead of today's dry line are showing CAPE values that are not just in the extreme category. They are in the upper percentile of the extreme category, with some locations reporting values approaching and in isolated areas exceeding 5,000 joules per kilogram. 5,000 joules per kilogram of atmospheric fuel sitting in the warm sector ahead of a sharpening dry line on a day when the storm prediction center has already issued a significant risk outlook is not a number that forecasters look at calmly. It is a number that makes experienced meteorologists sit up straighter in their chairs and start talking to each other in shorter sentences. That fuel does not stay fuel forever. It converts. It converts into Updrafts into rotating supercells, into hail the size of baseballs, into the low-level rotation that produces tornadoes. And today, the mechanism to ignite that fuel is sharp, well-defined, and moving into the target area right now. The second parameter that drove the upgrade is wind shear, and specifically the combination of deep layer shear and low-level shear that together create the rotational environment inside individual thunderstorm cells. The deep layer shear, the change in wind speed and direction between the surface and the upper levels of the atmosphere, provides the organizational backbone that allows supercell thunderstorms to maintain their structure over long periods and long distances, rather than collapsing under their own precipitation load, the way ordinary thunderstorms do. The deep layer shear values across today's threat corridor are running at levels that forecasters characterize as excellent for supercell maintenance and organization. Values that are more than sufficient to support the kind of long-tracked rotating storms that stay on the ground for 50, 100, 150 miles and produce continuous tornado threats along their entire path. But it is the low-level shear, the change in wind speed and direction in the lowest kilometer of the atmosphere, that is the most alarming parameter in today's upgraded setup. Low-level shear is what determines how quickly and how tightly surface rotation can develop beneath a supercell updraft. High low-level shear environments are the environments where the significant tornado parameter, the SPC's composite index for violent tornado potential, runs highest, and the low-level shear values coming in from today's wind profiler network across the target area have been trending upward all afternoon, reaching values in the top quartile of the historical database for significant tornado outbreaks. That trend, that upward movement in low-level shear throughout the afternoon hours, is precisely what accelerated the SPC's decision to upgrade. They were watching a parameter that should have been steady or declining as the afternoon heating cycle peaked, and instead they watched it climb. In severe weather forecasting, parameters that move in the wrong direction faster than the models projected are parameters that demand immediate response. The third parameter is the dry line itself, the boundary between the hot, dry air mass coming off the desert southwest and the warm, moist air mass flowing northward off the Gulf of Mexico, and specifically the sharpness and speed of its development today. A dry line that develops sharply and focuses the initiation of severe thunderstorms into a narrow, well-defined corridor is far more dangerous from a tornado perspective than a diffuse dry line that allows convection to initiate over a broad area, because concentrated initiation along a sharp boundary produces discrete supercell thunderstorms rather than a messy cluster of storms that interfere with each other and dilute the rotational potential of any individual cell. What the surface analysis is showing right now is a dry line that has become sharper and more defined over the last 3 hours than the morning models projected. A tighter moisture gradient, a more focused wind shift, a more organized boundary that is going to serve as a precise initiation trigger for discrete supercell development as the afternoon heating peaks and the convective inhibition that has been capping the atmosphere begins to erode. When that cap erodes, and the timing models are showing it eroding within the next 1 to 2 hours, the convection that fires along that boundary is not going to be ordinary. It is going to fire into one of the most explosive instability environments the Southern Plains has seen this season, with the shear to organize immediately and the fuel to intensify rapidly. The storms that develop in the next 2 hours are going to be the stories people are talking about tomorrow morning. The tornado threat is the headline hazard in today's upgraded outlook, and I need to be direct about the language the Storm Prediction Center is using in their forecast discussions, because that language is not routine. The probability of tornadoes within 25 miles of any point in the highest risk area has been raised to a level that forecasters only reach for when they have genuine data-backed confidence that significant tornado production is not just possible but likely. The hatched area, the cross-hatched overlay on the SPC's probability maps that specifically indicates the potential for strong, long-track, violent tornadoes rated EF2 or higher, has been expanded in the upgraded outlook to cover a larger geographic area than it did this morning. EF2 or higher. That is the threshold where tornado damage stops being repairable with insurance money and starts being the kind of damage that changes a community permanently. EF2 winds of 111 to 135 miles per hour destroy well-constructed homes, snap or uproot large trees, and turn vehicles into projectiles. EF3 winds of 136 to 165 miles per hour level entire neighborhoods. EF4 and EF5 winds, which are within the theoretical reach of today's atmospheric environment, given the instability and shear values currently being observed, produce damage that has to be seen to be believed, and that leaves first responders standing in what used to be a subdivision trying to find a reference point that still exists. The expanded hatched area in today's upgraded outlook is not a formality. It is the SPC communicating in the most direct language their Mapping system allows that the environment today is capable of producing the full spectrum of tornado violence up to and including the most extreme end. The hail threat in today's upgraded setup deserves its own direct discussion because large and giant hail is capable of producing catastrophic damage and serious injury. Entirely independent of tornado production and in an environment with CAPE values approaching 5,000 joules per kilogram, the updraft speeds inside organized supercell thunderstorms are going to be capable of lofting hailstones to sizes that most people have never personally encountered. Hail growth in a supercell updraft is a function of updraft speed. Faster updrafts keep. Hailstones aloft longer allow them to cycle through the growth zone more times and produce larger stones. The updraft speed potential in today's most intense supercells, based on the observed instability values, is in the range that produces baseball to softball sized hail. Baseball-sized hail, 2.75 inches in diameter, falls at terminal velocities that exceed 100 miles per hour. It punches through car windshields. It penetrates roofing material. It injures and kills people who are caught outdoors without shelter. A hailstone the size of a softball falling at terminal velocity carries kinetic energy comparable to a thrown brick. And it is falling not as a single stone, but as part of a swath that can cover dozens of square miles in minutes. Anyone caught outdoors in the core of today's supercell thunderstorms without immediate access to substantial shelter is in genuine danger from the hail threat alone, entirely separate from the tornado threat occurring simultaneously. The wind threat from today's storms is the third major hazard category, and it operates across a larger geographic footprint than either the tornado or hail threats, because damaging straight-line winds can occur not just in the immediate vicinity of the strongest supercells, but throughout the entire storm, complex as it evolves. As today's discrete supercell phase, the afternoon and early evening period when individual rotating storms are most tornado capable, transitions into a squall line configuration later tonight. The primary severe hazard shifts from tornadoes to widespread damaging winds. Squall lines associated with setups of this magnitude regularly produce widespread wind gusts of 70, 80, even 90 miles per hour along their leading edge, speeds that are equivalent to a Category 1 hurricane, and that are capable of producing structural damage across a swath hundreds of miles long in a matter of hours. The power outage potential from the squall line's wind damage tonight extends well beyond the tornado threat corridor and into communities that may not have been paying close attention to today's severe weather outlook because they were not in the highest risk zone for the afternoon tornado threat. Those communities need to be paying attention now. The squall line does not distinguish between communities that were watching all day and communities that tuned in late. The flash flooding component of today's upgraded threat is a detail that often gets lost in the tornado and hail conversation. But that, in a high moisture, high CAPE environment like this one, represents a serious and potentially deadly hazard in its own right. Supercell thunderstorms, in environments with precipitable water values as high as what today's atmosphere is carrying, can produce rainfall rates that exceed 3 inches per hour in the most intense updraft cores. 3 inches of rain in 1 hour, falling over an urban area, over a watershed that may already be running above normal after recent rainfall L events, produces flash flooding that can fill underpasses, overtop creek banks, and inundate roadways faster than any warning system can communicate and faster than drivers can respond. The combination of tornado warnings and flash flood warnings occurring simultaneously in the same geographic area, which is entirely plausible given today's atmospheric profile, creates a decision-making challenge for the public that is genuinely dangerous. Seeking low ground to shelter from a tornado puts you at risk from flash flooding. Seeking high ground to avoid flooding puts you at risk from tornado impact. The answer, in any structure that is not a mobile home or a vehicle, is to go to the lowest interior level of the strongest available structure. Not the lowest point outdoors, not a culvert, not a roadway underpass, but the interior of a substantial building at the lowest floor level. That guidance does not change regardless of the simultaneous hazards present. The overnight evolution of today's storm system carries its own specific danger that I need to address directly because the shift from afternoon supercell activity to overnight squall line activity does not represent a reduction in the threat. It represents a change in the threat character that in some ways makes it more dangerous, not less. Overnight severe weather is the most lethal category of severe weather event in the historical record, and the reason is simple and brutal. People are asleep. Warning dissemination that works adequately during daylight hours, television interruptions, outdoor sirens, smartphone alerts, reaches a dramatically smaller percentage of the at-risk population at 2 a.m. when phones are silenced and televisions are off, and the outdoor siren 2 blocks away cannot penetrate the walls of a house and the sound of a window air conditioner. The low-level jet that strengthens after dark and provides the rotational energy for tornado production does not care that most people are asleep. The squall line that arrives at midnight does no wait for morning. Every person in today's threat corridor needs to have a specific, tested plan for receiving and responding to severe weather warnings while they are sleeping. A weather radio with a battery backup and an audible alarm, a phone with wireless emergency alerts enabled and the volume turned up, a household plan that every member of the family knows and can execute in under 2 minutes in the dark. That plan needs to exist before tonight, not as a concept. As a practiced, specific, every person knows their role plan. Here is what you need to do right now, in the time between reading this and the first storms initiating. Know your shelter location. In a house, that is the lowest floor, an interior room, away from windows, a bathroom, a closet, a hallway in the center of the structure. In a mobile home or manufactured housing, that shelter location is not your home. It is a nearby substantial structure, and you need to be in that structure before the storms arrive, not when the tornado warning is issued, because tornado warnings for fast-moving supercells can have lead times as short as 3 to 5 minutes, and the time required to travel from a mobile home to a shelter can easily exceed that. Know your warning receipt plan for tonight. Charge your devices. Turn on your wireless emergency alerts. Put your weather radio where it can wake you up. Know the difference between a tornado watch, conditions are favorable for tornado development, stay aware, and a tornado warning. A tornado has been detected or indicated by radar and is imminent. Take shelter immediately. That distinction matters because the appropriate response to each is different and the time pressure of a warning demands immediate action without deliberation. Do not shelter in a vehicle. Do not shelter in a highway underpass. Both of those locations are specifically documented in the tornado. Fatality record is places where people died because they made a decision that felt intuitively protective and was in fact more dangerous than the open ground around them. An underpass concentrates and accelerates the wind, turns debris into a higher velocity stream, and provides no protection from the direct impact of tornado force winds on the structure above you. A vehicle can be flipped, rolled, and destroyed by EF1 winds that are well below the peak potential of today's most intense supercells. If you are in a vehicle when a tornado warning is issued, drive perpendicular to the storm's path. If you can do so safely, find a substantial structure to shelter in, and if no structure is available, and you cannot escape the storm's path, get out of the vehicle and lie flat in the lowest available ground. A ditch, a depression, covering your head. That is a last resort. The goal is to never be in that situation by knowing the forecast, watching the sky, and being in shelter before the storm arrives. Today's severe threat just got worse. The Storm Prediction Center upgraded it because the atmosphere demanded honesty and the data gave them no other choice. The instability is higher than this morning's forecast captured. The shear is stronger. The dry line is sharper. The tornado potential is real. It is significant. It is in the hatched area. On the official forecast map, and the overnight evolution of today's squall line extends the threat timeline well past the point when most people will still be paying attention. The gap between a severe weather day that people survive and a severe weather day that produces mass casualties is not the storm itself. It is preparation. It is having the plan, knowing the shelter, understanding the warnings, and taking the action before the sirens are already screaming. The atmosphere is loaded. The storms are coming. And right now, in this moment, you still have time to make every decision that matters. Use it.